And if there's not space at the table for Jesus to speak to people at Alpha, then, we become Laodicean, for want of a better thing. And that's true of church as well. I mean, I guess that's what I was trying to say. I think most of us, we could put on a church service. It could even be quite, in one sense, a good church service. But if the Spirit isn't there, then we're in deep trouble.
Welcome to this week's, you see, I didn't say good morning. Well, because we're not recording in the morning. Iain is not here. The wheels have come off and we're recording at night.
We've kind of
That's just what happens.
We've gone States time. It could be here in the day because we're at night time. It's just, we're so connected that even when he's not here, we're connected with him.
It turns out all our clocks have synced to
with
Iain
time.
Well, anyway, we're here. Myself, Jack and Brodie. How are you both?
Well, thank you.
Good, but you've not even said, for the person who's the first-time listener, you've gone rabbit trail without even completing the first sentence.
I'm
so
assuming
please,
if
can
they've got this far that they realise that this is Calling a City to Life, a podcast by Queen's Park Baptist Church in Glasgow. If not,
well, good job.
Didn't know that? You know that now. So, Brodie preached this weekend, but before we get on to that, it's Corrections Corner time.
Oh.
Because Brodie preached this weekend, but he also sent us some additional material because, to be fair, it was a bit of a, what's the word for something that's completely, like, you're never going to be able to fulfill it? Like one sermon on the 7 churches.
Pint in a
Impossible
quart pot
to do.
or something like that, isn't it?
Like some sort of Greek myth type thing that would fit into it, rolling a stone up a hill or whatever it is. So, yeah, this was
so
never going to be...
So we got extra time.
So we got extra time from Brodie. But there's a very important corrections corner in Brodie's extra time. Now, last time, Brodie, you were on the show because you weren't here last week.
He was here last
week.
No,
you were here last week. Last time, the 4 of us were on the show. It was just before a Scotland football match. And you slapped us down when it was suggested that we should pray for Scottish football. Scottish football went straight out and lost. So, we'll take that under consideration for the future. But in your extra time, you referenced a Celtic bar that you had visited and you'd phoned your brother-in-law, who, if he listens to it, I'm surprised, will be straight on the phone to you, because I think you said in it that he spoke to you and he told you that the mural was of John Brown. I can assure you the mural was definitely not of John Brown.
What's his name then? I know it's Brown. Mr. Brown.
John Brown, famous Rangers player. Scott Brown, famous Celtic player. So there you go. So that's correct. Because
just want to point out, we didn't actually go in the bar. We just walked by it.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
In Brodie's defence, I would just like to say that if he's only making mistakes in relation to who football players are,
we'll get into all his other interpreting mistakes on the 7 churches shortly.
Far less important.
Well, Brodie, you had the slightly thankless task of preaching on these 7 churches this weekend. Give us I'm now going to say give us a 60-second summary of something that you had to record extra time for to get it in. But go for it, 60 seconds. Feel free to speak.
I think
quickly.
We should speak for 2 minutes. You go for it.
2 minutes. Okay, we'll give you a bit extra.
I think so. The 60-second summary is that while this is a hard message, it is primarily there to give them hope and encouragement. Jesus says to the church in Laodicea that, he rebukes or he disciplines those who he loves. So at the end of the day, the big takeaway is Jesus loves the church. We need to love the church. I was struck by the fact that he speaks specifically to the 7 churches, so he doesn't lump them together, so it's not some general message. And I tried to draw out of how our location and the particular, for want of a better word, job that God has for us to do manifests itself in each church is different. So, we're not just like the church down the road, because our context and location and God's call on us is slightly different. And then reflected on four of the churches and kind of slipped in that, this isn't a message about how to escape our troubles, but how to remain loyal to Jesus in the midst of troubles and hardship. And those troubles and hardship really differed between the churches. So you had, places like Smyrna, where there was quite real hostility. Pergamum, that we didn't really go into on Sunday, where, somebody dies. But then Laodicea, it appears that actually they're just a bit too comfortable. And what does that all say to us? And I think this Sunday, in some respects, is a carry-on. Chapters 4 and 5 is a carry-on. It's part of the remedy of how do we remain faithful. Because I landed with, Jesus says to the church in Laodicea, you're naked, you're poor, you're blind, you need to buy gold from me, you need to buy cloth from me, you need to buy eye salve. And how do we do that? And I think chapter 4 and 5 give us a glimpse into that, and touched briefly on that when we finished.
It's a really, it's 2 chapters that we're trying to talk about here. And if you had to do extra time, then it feels like there might need to be like 3 extra time podcasts just to even cover that. And even as you're talking, I'm realizing that the question that I'd said to Richard, I feel like this should be the opener. I'm realizing that I'd really like to open with another one, which is just something that stuck out for me. So sorry, Richard, I'm kind of like going off piste already.
And you thought you wouldn't be able to get lots of questions on this.
Well, it's interesting because at the start of each letter, it says there's a different name used or different reference that Jesus is using in relation to himself. So for Ephesus, the message from the one who holds the 7 stars and so on. And then when you come to Smyrna, this message from the one who's the first and the last. Pergamum, the one with the 2-edged sword, and so on. So it's different for each of the 7 churches. What is the significance, if any, of the names being different?
People can read about that in the blog, because that was the blog last Thursday.
Well, there you go.
Part of it. So for some of them, it's drawing upon the vision that we have in chapter 1 of this Colossus type image of Jesus. And then it expands upon that. It really addresses some of the main challenges that particular church is facing. So where kind of like untruth is the issue, Jesus appears as the one with the double-edged sword, the one who speaks truth and cuts away lies. So each of those images refers to kind of like the main challenge, persecution that the church was facing. And then the opening, so that opening message of, I am the Amen is the start to the church in Laodicea. The final bit, which is normally a promise, or, if you do this, they both marry up in some respects as well. And then in the middle, you have either, praise and rebuke, or just rebuke. Yeah. But it marries up. So it reminds us that this whole book from chapter 1 to 22 is a vision of Jesus, there to equip us to remain allegiant, remain loyal to Jesus, to worship rightly, because there are all these forces that are trying to distort our worship. And when our worship becomes distorted, it's because we've got a wrong image of who God is. And that then feeds through to how we live our lives and our works. I'm not sure Luther would have liked Revelation 2 and 3 a lot, because it's all about works. It's all about what we do. But that image, having that right image of who God is, and the image, I think when I read that as a teenager, they were scary images. But I think for those early Christians, reading those images, they were comforting. So, again, Jesus is the one with the 2-edged sword in his mouth is not scary. That's comforting. He breaks away the lies. He comes with truth. So that's what the images are doing.
Wouldn't a lot of the language as well, or the reference and the phrasing, it's that kind of hyperlink thing that the Bible Project talks about, of it's Old Testament, it's Hebrew Bible stuff that they would have been familiar with.
Yeah. So, the one of the churches, here's where I'm rubbish at names. I have a terrible memory. So one of the churches that is facing opposition from people who culturally are Jewish and coming with all this sort of teaching, you have this whole thing which is lifted from the Old Testament about Jesus being in the line of David and having the keys of David and opening that which cannot be shut and shutting that which cannot be opened. I mean, they would probably know chapter and verse where that comes from. And so much, I mean, John creates this tapestry where he weaves together images from Zechariah, from Ezekiel, from Jeremiah, from Isaiah, and he weaves them all together. And by the time he's weaved it together, it has been added to, or it's bigger than what it is. The sum of it is greater than its parts as it gets pushed through the image of the risen Christ.
As part of your setup, you talk about the 7 letters revealing what discipleship looks like and what it looks like to follow Jesus. But with Revelation, there's much of it that obviously you're understanding in the context of his time, even as we've just talked about just now, the way that the language would have been familiar to the churches then. How do we ensure that we take the bits that we need to take from these chapters and not the bits that we shouldn't, not the things that aren't relevant to us?
So I think it's all relevant to us. The question is, how is it relevant to us? So currently for us sitting in Glasgow, we don't face the possibility of death. You know, there's not an equivalent of Antipas who has been killed. And part of that, some of the background to this is that in the Roman Empire, the Jews had a special status. So the Jews were exempt from the rituals of swearing allegiance to Caesar, but also the rituals that allowed them to trade in the marketplace, etc. So here you have a new Jewish group called Christians who want these same exemptions. And it's causing problems for the local Jews because they're like, these guys are nutters. They're just causing us problems. So that's possibly, most probably, the reason of some of the antagonism there. So while we don't face, in this country, the prospect of death because people are getting upset with us, there are some people who would get very upset with us. Mm-hmm. So how do we navigate that? But there are other Christians in different parts of the world who do face the very real prospect of jail or death or other forms of. So that's part of the thing of when we read this, of actually thinking of the global church as well as the local church, of it actually perhaps in certain contexts, in Pakistan perhaps, speaks in a very more direct way than it does to us, and actually can act as a aide-memoire in one sense for us. Do you know what? I need to pray for my brothers and sisters in the persecuted church today who are facing stuff like this, that I'm not facing that, but also alert us to, well, are some of the challenges that we face more subtle? That's why I quite liked, I ended by quoting a Canadian scholar who says, those of us who live in the West need to read this as Laodiceans. And part of the Laodiceans' problem was that were they accommodationist? Were they a bit too comfortable in their culture? And that's good questions to ask. Not that we want a knee-jerk response to that, but a considered, discerning response of, are we too accommodating to our culture? What does it mean to be a healthy, loyal, following, worshipping, witnessing follower of Jesus with all that?
Yeah. When you read the 2 chapters through together, I think one of the things that struck me in a new way this time was how Jesus sees and knows everything. And I think we're so guilty of thinking that we're hiding sin from God, or that we are behaving in a way that he's not seeing or he doesn't know. And I sort of love this sense of, well, it's like that verse of meet the man who told me everything that I ever did. It's literally that he knows everything. And you become so aware of his complete and full assessment of their situations. And it just makes you feel, well, it made me feel a bit humbled, like, he knows everything. What do we think we're trying to hide? We can't.
And so I think as well of, imagine how encouraging that is. You're this, you're this tiny minority. So Smyrna was possibly a 250,000 people. It was quite a large city. and you're this tiny minority, and Jesus sees you and doesn't just see you, he understands your situation. And for sure, there's correction in there, but it reminds me of, how the Exodus story starts off, God hears their cries and sees them, of Jesus sees us. And in chapter 4, is it chapter 5, we have this wonderful image of these incest bowls being filled with the prayers of the saints. And what an encouragement of that, do you know what? Your prayers are escaping the room. They've made it all the way up to God's throne room. He hears you. He's holding these. And the other image that I really kind of was reflecting upon, kind of more myself, didn't really bring this out, was the significance of Jesus holding the 7 stars. And so the 7 stars represent the church. And this difference of Jesus holding, so when you think of you hold it, it's suggestive of care, it's suggestive of protection, of safety. He holds us. Jesus doesn't just have a church, but he holds us, he undergirds us. So while in one sense, the fact that, Jesus sees us, he knows everything, in one sense can be a bit, we're worried about what that might reveal of. The good news is that God doesn't shame us, and Jesus doesn't shame us. So there's hard things said in there to the churches, but it's within this context of he is holding us. And the other thing of he is in their midst. Of very often when we're going through hard times, the thing that we struggle with the most is feeling God present with us. We remember that Revelation is this revealing category. It's apocalyptic, it's revealing things. So one of the truths that it's speaking into their situation and our situation is, even if you don't feel that Jesus is present with you, he is present with you.
Yeah. And I think, as you're saying, that he's not shaming them, he's calling them to life.
Yeah.
He all the things that he's saying are, you can imagine that they, in much the same way as we are, that they have missed what they were getting wrong, and they're not understanding what it is that they're missing. But he's not only just pointing it out, but he's also sort of saying that you need to get back to your first love. You need to. He is giving the positive encouragement about what it looks like to move away from what they're doing.
Yeah. And that's why one of the key things that we need to do is listen, and that attentive listening and listening together. I think that's one of the challenges for us. So that, again, that was one of the things I was reflecting on. These are words to the church, not just to individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just how I respond to this, but how do we respond to that? And within that brings, and we see some of this within the oracles themselves to the different churches of, we're all at slightly different places. So Jesus says, I can't remember which church it is he says it to, but I think it's Laodicea, of, some of you have basically sullied your clothes, but some of you have kept your clothes white. So even within that context and that message, there's people are at slightly different places, and we all face different circumstances. We all come from different backgrounds. We're all in different stages in our walk with Jesus. Some of us are fairly new Christians, others very old, and yet we're called to respond to this together with Jesus nuancing what he's saying. So what does that look like? That I've not just lost my first love, but we've lost our first love.
Yeah, I think it is something that I noticed when you were going through this, when I was reading through it separately, is that, this is Jesus writing to the churches, not to the individuals, so to speak, within the churches. Most of the other books in the Bible are written by, let's say it's written by Paul, inspired by Jesus, inspired by God. This appears almost to be more direct. It is the apostle, but Jesus speaking directly to the churches. And it's not as in the book of Romans or Ephesians, whereby it's a letter to the Ephesians, and then within the Ephesians, here's a word for the young people, here's a word for the old people, here's a bit for the women, here's a bit for the men, here's a bit for whatever section, the Jews, the Gentiles. This is a note to the whole church. And it got me wondering what it would be like, because the way the intro is in my translation, it's "and to the angel of the church in Smyrna," for example. Now, I'm not sure. It's clearly angel is not angel, I assume. It's messenger or something similar, because it's an actual correspondence in on real parchment or whatever. I wonder what it would have been like to be in one of those 7 churches and for someone to rock up with a little envelope with some parchment or a scroll going, "Oh, by the way, here's a wee letter." And you can just imagine Laodicea getting all excited. They're all full of themselves. And then they open it and they go, oh dear. Yeah, not quite what we were expecting. I just wonder the practicalities of what actually happened here.
Yeah, well, I mean, starting where you were going with the commentators are a bit kind of like ambivalent, or will not nail their colours to the flag, as it were, with regards to the angel, because as you say, the Greek word for messenger is what we quite often in our English translations will have as angel. So is this a spiritual being? Does each church have almost like a guardian angel, for want of a better phrase? Is it the church leader? Is it the messenger who is taking the message to those churches? It made me think of, many of you, dear listeners, will be familiar with a 360 review. Now, most people's 360 reviews are private. You get it, and the people that you're doing your kind of like annual review with read it, and obviously the person who wrote it knows it. But it's not just the Laodiceans that receive the message to Laodicea. The Ephesians get to hear it as well, and they all get to
read each other's.
And you're kind of like, wow, how does that land?
Yeah.
But also, why do that? I mean, today I think modern managers would really frown on something like that. But I think it's perhaps to give an appreciation of, you're all my church together, but you have these different challenges. And maybe, I don't know, this is pure speculation on my part, maybe the churches who just got rebuke, Sardis and Laodicea, send some folk to Smyrna and say, can we learn some stuff from you? Because you got a really positive report from Jesus.
Yeah.
I don't know, did that happen? Because the distances between these places, aren't huge. 30 miles here, 40 miles there, which obviously in those days is comparatively further than it is, now. I mean, Edinburgh's only 40 miles away, and yet it can seem like on the other side of the world sometimes, having to battle across the M8 or take the train or whatever. So I wonder whether there was a bit of cross-fertilisation there, or support of, maybe some of the other churches thought, oh, we need to go and help these other guys, and there was a deputation sent. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd never really thought about the fact that it's the whole letter that gets sent to the churches. It's not, here's this little portion to the church at Laodicea. Yeah. It's actually, here's the whole book of Revelation. By the way, there's a wee special mention for you in there. So this is going to loads of churches, presumably.
Yeah.
Because it's being circulated, and, it goes to, it goes to Newton Mearns Church and somewhere, and it goes to Queen's Park Baptist Church somewhere, and we're all looking at it going, oh boy, mate, wait till this letter gets to Smyrna. Because everybody else has got to read it. And I never really thought about the circular nature of that.
Yep, and what we don't know. So we know that in these days that, a letter, just even a normal letter, quite often would be given to somebody, not the postman, but, somebody that you knew. And quite often you'd gone through the letter with them, explaining, so they could ask questions of, Richard, what do you mean here? And you could explain that. So presumably that process happened with John as he's written this down and is giving it to a person or persons to take. So we don't know whether it was the same person who went on a circuit round each of these reading this out, because that's how it would have been heard, or whether there was 7 kind of like people sent out with their own. I doubt the latter, because, you know, parchment's expensive. If John's in some kind of house arrest in Patmos, then even getting hold of parchment might have been quite tricky. So I'm not sure that he copied this out 7 times and said.
So one guy or girl going round these churches handing this over.
Yeah, but they would have been schooled by John to like take the questions and help the people work through some of this. So they weren't with it on their own.
Maybe it was wise to leave Laodicea to the last then. We'll go there last.
Well, the beautiful thing with how the word to the Laodiceans end is it ends with a door, and chapter 4 opens with a door. So just even from kind of like a stylistic prose kind of way, there's a lovely, we would call it a segue or now or something like that. They're sure those who are more educated than me in kind of like literary devices, there'll be a proper name for that. But Laodicea ends with a door, and chapter 5 opens with a different door.
Well, it feels like a good place for a segue ourselves then. So if you listened last week, we had Des speaking from Alpha, and I had the pleasure of interviewing the main man from Alpha International, Nicky Gumbel. So we're going to play you that little interview just now. Well, we welcome to the show a very special guest. I'm not sure what his title is nowadays. Perhaps he will clarify. But we welcome to the show.
I have no title.
No title.
I have no titles, no honours, nothing. Well, I'm just Nick.
If you don't recognise the voice by now, yes, this is Nicky Gumbel. So welcome to the show. Welcome to Calling a City to Life, Nicky. Really nice to make your acquaintance. I got to stare at you from a distance in the Albert Hall some months ago. I now get to stare at you, you know, it's still from further distance, but it feels like I'm sitting in your own study now, that I see all the books aligned behind you.
It's good, Zoom, because you are kind of invited into other people's homes. And that's what we found with Alpha in Zoom. And during lockdown, people said, you know, you missed the hospitality. You're not having a meal together. And then someone pointed out, yeah, you're missing that, but you are invited into everybody's homes.
Yes.
And you see their home in a way that you don't if you just meet together in a group, you know, in a small group in church. So it's quite an interesting thing, isn't it?
We'll not mention what has just happened by way of me seeing you spill your coffee.
I just spilled the coffee all over my desk. And
I got to see your lovely wife coming and assisting you as well. So we've got two Gumbels for the price of one. There we go. Excellent. So, Nicky, people will hopefully be familiar with the Alpha course, if for no other reason than they listened to last week's show and heard Des Johnson speaking about Alpha. They may or may not be as familiar with yourself. So do you think you could give us a potted history of Nicky Gumbel?
Well, my father was a refugee. He was Jewish. He came to this country, not a churchgoer, nor was my mother. And I was an atheist growing up, and I encountered Jesus at the age of 18 through reading the New Testament. And since then, I've had a passion to communicate the difference that Jesus makes. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it in all its fullness. That's what I've discovered, and that's what I want everyone to know.
And it would be fair to say that you've done not too badly in your career thus far in communicating what it is that you wanted people to know via the Alpha course. I think I first came across the Alpha course in Edinburgh, possibly like 1993, 1994 at St Paul's and St George's in Edinburgh.
Yes.
But we are now looking forward, not just from the 90s and the nows, the 2023s. We're looking forward to 2033 And in particular, that's why we've got you on the show today, is to talk to us about the Alpha Vision 2033 and what we can do about it as churches, as individuals. So can you tell us a little bit, first of all, about what the inspiration is for Alpha 2033?
Well, as I'm sure you have in your diary, Richard, and I'm sure all your listeners have in their diaries, the 17th of April, 2033, which is less than 10 years ahead now. The 17th of April, 2033, as I'm sure you know, and I suspect many of your listeners know, is the Easter Day, 2033, and the 2000th anniversary of the resurrection of Jesus. And many people have sensed a call to make it possible, given that Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations, and he's given us 2,000 years, that we should try and make the gospel available to everyone on the planet by that date. So different groups have come together. For example, the Bible translators have come together, and they have a plan to translate the New Testament into 99.96% of the languages in the world. And every language will have 25 chapters of the New Testament by that date. And then Rick Warren is doing something called Finish the FTT, which is a Bible, a believer, and a body of Christ in every community. We had a gathering. I was in Rome for a 2-day gathering of Catholic movements, all of which are dedicated to the 2033 vision. And they all have different, some of them are prayer movements, some of them are, they're different, but everyone has this vision that by the 17th of April, 2033, we aim to make the message of Jesus available to everyone on the planet. And our part with Alpha is to make Alpha available to everyone on the planet by 2033. So, of course, we're just part of the picture. We can't do it on our own. We're doing it with all these different denominations, all the different organizations, but over 30 million people have now done Alpha. It's a sort of, we've done the research and development. Now we want to do the rollout and make it available. So we've just done a Chinese version of Alpha, which is, I mean, Alpha has always been available in pretty much every language in the world. But what is new is a Chinese version that is purely Chinese. All the presenters are Chinese, all the testimonies are Chinese, all the experts are Chinese, all the vox pops are Chinese. It's produced in China, and it is there's no Western, no West. The only common feature is that the main presenter wears a blue jumper, similar to ones that I wear. So that's the only common feature.
You got there before me in saying precisely that the only common translation was the blue jumper. Des referred to the blue jumper.
Yes, that's the only common feature.
Is your wardrobe like Albert Einstein's, that it's just he made his wardrobe simple by only having one set of clothes to wear, so he didn't make that choice? Is there a wardrobe full of blue jumpers? The people demand an answer.
I got a few. Pips complains they get holes in them, so she occasionally gets when there are enough holes, she gets another one.
Good stuff. So what is changing about Alpha in order to facilitate this vision? You've outlined something about the Chinese version, that you're focused on making it all culturally relevant, the whole thing. For those that haven't done an Alpha course, a lot of it's sometimes video based and has your good self featuring it, and that's all been adapted so it's Chinese presenters that are doing the vox pops, the people that are interviewed, etc., etc. Is there anything else that's fundamentally being stepped up or engaged with differently to get through the next 10 years to the fulfillment of the vision?
Our principle is that the gospel is unchanging. The message is unchanging. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So we're not going to change the message. The message hasn't changed for the last 30 years, but the packaging has changed every course. So Pippa and I have just started our 100th in a small group in a row. And we're in a small group because we want to listen to what young people are saying, and to adapt the packaging for young people. Somebody asked me, well, how has it changed in the last 30 years? And I would say it's unrecognizable. But each course, the changes are very small. It's a bit like watching your children grow up. If you say, do your children look the same yesterday as today? Yes, they do. But our 43-year-old son looks very different from when he was a little tiny baby.
Yes.
But each day he looked the same. And I think that's the same with Alpha. It's evolved in 30 years. As we've listened to the people in the small group, the packaging has changed. I think the mistake that the church sometimes makes is to think that we need to change the message to make it more culturally relevant, but to leave the packaging exactly the same. And the result is a lose-lose situation because the people outside the church are put off by the packaging and they don't get to hear the message has no power because you've changed it and watered it down to fit the culture. So we don't want to change. The gospel is the power of God. We're not changing the message of the gospel because that's what changes people's lives. But in order for people to hear that message, we have to change the packaging. Otherwise, they may be put off by the packaging and never hear the message. So that's a constant. So we're working now on a new film series. We did a film series 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago. No, it's 8 years ago. But it's, culture's changed in the last 8 years. Although we used it recently. We've just done two courses in our own home since I've left HTB. And we used the videos. And interestingly, people said, wow, why are you refilming them? What's wrong with them? So I think they still work. But I think things don't go out of date sort of like in a straight line. They sort of seem totally okay, and then they suddenly go out of date. So we're preparing for that moment by doing a news. We don't want to not have the new film series out when that moment happens. So we've been involved in the project for the last 3 years, and we're about to start refilming quite soon.
Great stuff. And you must then have some stories of how you've seen different people and different organisations and different small groups change the packaging over what was standardly sent to them when they asked for all the booklets or the videos. We heard last week from Des talking about a surfing alpha course that he heard about. You must have come across some weird and wonderful packaging changes over the years.
It's amazing. It's amazing to see the same course running in prisons and in Parliament. It's running in universities and it's running in homeless shelters. It's running in the Washington, D.C., but it's also on the urban estates in Zimbabwe, in the townships. It's just, to me, it's extraordinary. But what it is the fact that the gospel is the same. Jesus is the same. And everyone in the world there are many different cultures, but everybody's searching for love. Everyone's searching for purpose. And everyone's searching to belong. And that's what people find. They come on the course. They feel loved from the moment they walk in. They come into an atmosphere of love, encouragement, warmth, and they hear a message of love, that the Son of God loved them and gave himself for them. And then they experience his love through the Holy Spirit on the Alpha weekend. Everyone's looking for purpose, and ultimately life doesn't make sense until you find a relationship with God through Jesus. And then people are looking to belong. And what happens, we had the first night of Alpha on Tuesday. We're doing it now at our where we go, Holy Trinity, Clapham Common, Wilberforce's old church, right. where now that we've left HTB, well, I haven't left HTB, I'm still on the staff, but we attend our local church, which is an HTB plant. And it's just amazing to look around at that group. And I know by the end of the course, we will all be great friends. And the woman I sat next to said, my parents are atheists. I'm an atheist. I teach at a school, and I've seen something in one of the teachers there has very impressed me, and that's why I've come along to this course. And I hope I don't know what will happen, but I hope by the end of the course, all of the people in that group will have encountered Jesus and they will look around and think, I love all these people in this group. By about week 5, they all want to be on a WhatsApp group together. And then what they've discovered is belonging to a group of people who they haven't only known for 5 weeks, but they feel closer to than many of their friends at work or colleagues at work or wherever it is, because there's this unique, the church is the most amazing community on earth. And they've experienced what it means to be part of the church.
There's not really a lot more I can say about that. There's no point in me trying to emphasise what is just a stunning representation of just what Alpha has done and what the gospel can and does provide for people. But what part do you think that we as Christians in the local churches can actually play now in the fulfillment of this vision?
I think everyone can have a vision for the area that appeals to them. I mean, for some people, it might be their street. I just want everyone on my street to have the opportunity to hear. For others, it might be, I want everyone in my city, Glasgow. Would everyone in Glasgow to get the opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus by 2033. And so, some we were in a gathering in Liverpool last week, thinking about how everyone in Liverpool could hear the good news by 2033. So I think it's thinking about some people have a passion for their street, some people for their city, some people for their nation, some people for the world. But whatever it is, you can play a part. Maybe just for your household, that everybody in your family will get the opportunity, or everyone in your business, or everyone in your gym will get the opportunity. But I guess it's just making the most of every opportunity. Someone turned up. The house next door to us, on my left, has got building works going on. And our neighbours have moved out for 38 weeks.
Wow.
And about 8 weeks ago, there was a man with a rucksack outside looking at his phone and saying, I've rented a room in this house. And I just said to him, I saw him standing there, and I said, you can't have rented a room in this house. I know the neighbours, they would never rent out a room in their house at any time, let alone while they're having building works. And it turned out it was a scam. And he'd had to pay £800 up front for a room. So I said, come in and let's, contact your bank. Let's try and, sort this out. And such a lovely guy, 26 years of age, from Zimbabwe, just come over here.
Wow.
And just as he was going, I thought, I gave him a book written by my son called Loved.
Okay.
And I didn't think anything of it much, but a few weeks later, 2 or 3 weeks later, I got an email from him, said he'd read my son's book,
Cool.
And it had a profound impact on him.
Wow.
Could he come? Could we meet up? So we went for a walk, and I said to him, look, I'm going to give the first talk on an Alpha course that's starting in my local church, Holy Trinity, Clapham Common. Would you like to come along? He said, the day before, he emailed me saying, yeah, please, what time, where can we meet? And so there he was, sitting in our small group.
Yeah.
And such a lovely guy, 26. He loves touch rugby. He was a very, very good cricketer, very good rugby player. And they do a lot of sport at the church, and he's going to join the touch rugby team there and stuff. And you just think, even if it's just for one person, it's worth it. You don't have to have a vision for, everybody on the planet. It's just, if everybody can reach one person,
yeah,
and that one person can reach someone else, then we can reach the world.
Yeah, what a great story of just seizing the opportunity that God puts in front of you. That's amazing. The people that just get brought into our lives that just by that little momentary reaction of come in, or here's something of mine, it can make such a big difference. So as we bring this to a close, Nicky, I want to know, in the next 10 years, so first of all, have you got your Airbnb booked for, I don't even know if you can go that far forward, for 10 years from now, for travelling out to Jerusalem? Is that where you're going to be?
Oh, I don't know where we'll be for the 200. I did speak at the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. We launched the vision on Easter Day, 2023. I happened to be speaking at the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem.
Just by coincidence.
So it was really. It was God incidence. By God incidence. I had been invited to speak on Easter Day 2023. So it seemed a great place to launch it from. And so, this is, whether it's the actual site or not, I don't think matters. It's an amazing visual aid. The sort of the empty tomb, the sort of picture of the resurrection happening 1990 years ago to go, and we have 10 years to go before the 2000th anniversary. Let's do it together.
Absolutely. No, it's an amazing vision. I very much enjoyed hearing about it down at the Alpha Leaders Conference, or Alpha Leadership Conference, because it's for all leaders, not just those that lead Alpha. Back a few months ago. There'll be another one of those coming next year, presumably.
Yeah.
The vision will be a focus again and be a regular feature of these conferences going forward until 2033.
Yes, we will. We're down to have the leadership conference next year. Will be on the 6th and 7th of May at the Royal Albert Hall.
There you go.
And it's people, as you know, Richard, people from all over the world and from every different part of the church. And that's what I love about it, is the diversity, the cultural diversity and the diversity within the body of Christ, all coming together, united around a common purpose, united around the fact we're all sons and daughters of God the Father. We all love Jesus. We all have the Holy Spirit living within us. What unites us is infinitely greater than what divides us. And we all have a common purpose to see the evangelization of our nations, the revitalization of the church, and the transformation of society.
Excellent. Well, you can go to alpha.org to find out all about it. And you can join, I assume you're invited to the conference next year. So I assume
I hope so.
You haven't got your invitation through yet. So I assume you'll be there. I'll hopefully be there somewhere in the back rows, up in the God's bit of the Albert Hall somewhere. But if you would like to go along to that and you'd like to find out more about Vision 2033, then do visit the Alpha website at alpha.org. Nicky, thank you very much for your time. I hope that you're being brought a fresh cup of coffee due to the one that was spilled just before we started recording.
I don't deserve it. I don't deserve it. I think I'm going to be in serious trouble.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much for joining us. All the best.
So much love. God bless.
Welcome back. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And yeah, just it was a great chat. It was very funny. You'll not mind me saying, watching him spill his coffee just as we started. But hopefully the message improved as we went on from that slight calamity at the start. So yeah, do check out all things Alpha Course. And if you're interested in the Alpha Conference coming up in 2024, then go to the Alpha website for details. Jackie, we left just as you were teeing yourself up for a question.
I mean, it wasn't, and now I feel silly that you've come to me, because I've just been wanting to say for like the last 3 sentences that it feels like they're all getting to read someone else's report card at school. That's I mean, can you imagine having got to read everybody else's report card? It's just quite funny. So it wasn't a big question at all. Sorry. Total anticlimax there.
Not at all. I think it would certainly made me feel better had I got to read some other people's report cards that I knew. Yeah, it's like a good news, bad news thing. It's like what's that game you play whereby fortunately, unfortunately, If anyone's familiar with that.
Comparison is the thief of joy. So I think at any point,
true.
if they're looking at each other and in any way that is unhelpful, I understand your joke, but
Well, you're the only one that does, so that's fine. You and Laura will understand it. Laura gets all my jokes, or Rose, they get all my jokes. You kind of focus then, Brodie, and kind of pitch to some sort of practicality, discipleship stuff for us as Christians and churchgoers to our own church. And you had a bit of a focus on just the kind of aspect of spending time with God. And we've touched on this a few times in the podcast recently about developing good habits of just taking some time out to recognise that it's not about the things you're doing. It's not about how good you are or how good you are in relation to things and how active you are in the church and all these things. It's actually about spending time with God. What, if any, practical things could you point us in the direction of to actually help all of us be better at making space? Yeah.
That's a toughie, isn't it? And I think one of the things to say within all of that is, now I'm thinking, can I even phrase it this way, of Christianity is relationship, not magic. So just forming new habits, in one sense, changes us, but it doesn't bring the transformation that Christ brings, because the transformation that we're looking for is to become more Christ-like. What developing, people call them spiritual practices or whatever, or, spiritual habits do, is they create purposeful opportunities for us to encounter the Spirit afresh and for the Spirit to do a work in our lives and for us to participate in that. So the challenge is finding time and doing a regular time. I can remember a friend saying that they went to the gym and the first thing that the instructor said was, "What do you enjoy doing?" He says, "Because if you don't enjoy doing this, you'll give up in a few weeks." And I think that's one of the things that we've got to, or perhaps an entry point is, so what do we enjoy doing? Do we enjoy reading our Bible? Do we enjoy listening to worship music? Do we enjoy chatting things through with friends? So that's perhaps a starting place, moving from that place of joy and then moving on to some of the perhaps harder things to do. Or maybe people find being silent and just sitting and focusing on God easy. My mind wanders. I find it so hard. But I also have really, over the past year or so, really feel as though I've grown and benefited from just practicing, I guess, what some people would call centering prayer, where I'm not coming to God with a great big long list. I'm really challenged by when Jesus is with his disciples and he says, don't be like them over there who just babble and babble and babble in their prayer, of sometimes more is less in how much we say in prayer. But just for me personally, it's been that challenge to just create a space in my day, maybe more than once, ideally more than once, where I sit for 5 minutes in quiet, not saying anything, just saying, Father, I just choose to sit in your love. I just receive your love now. And when my mind starts to wander, just bringing myself back by just saying that phrase of, Father, I choose to sit in your love, and just allowing myself to recognise and feel that I am loved by God. So we're back to Jackie's kind of like, I am seen. And the challenge is finding a regular time to do that. So we all have kind of like a routine. So whether that's getting up 5 minutes early, and if you live in a busy household, that can be a challenge as well. So perhaps for you, it's on your drive to work. You park up 5 minutes early before you get out your car, and you can just spend that 5 minutes in your car in quiet because there's nobody else there. But build something into your day that is a fixture of your day, and don't feel shame or guilt when you don't manage it, because that's, again, a mechanism and a lie of the enemy to say, you're no good at this, are you? You might as well give up because you're rubbish at it. Because I think we move from I can remember years ago, in fact, as a teenager, of hearing the kind of like the three, 3Ds of desire, discipline, delight. So we move from that place of, God, I desire to spend more time with you, just sitting in your presence, not bringing big, long lists to you, to the discipline of doing it. And when we start something new, it can be hard, but you eventually go through kind of like that discipline in beds, and it becomes a delight of seeing that trajectory. It can be useful there's lots of different resources out there that can help us with some of that sort of stuff. So I know lots of people really appreciate the Lectio 365. Is it 356? I'm rubbish with numbers. The Lectio
365.
I'm hoping it's 365, otherwise we've got different problems.
The world's spinning faster for me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So lots of people find things like that helpful. You get kind of like, daily kind of like Bible reading books and prayer books and things like that some people find helpful. Other people don't find those helpful. So it's not there's a right and a wrong, or thou must and thou must not in this, because the goal is spending time with God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for each of us, that can take different forms, because just as Jesus meets the churches as individual churches, so Jesus meets us as we are made. So, if you're hyperactive, Jesus knows that. He's going to meet you in your hyperactivity. So for me, most times when I'm praying, I'm walking. Mm-hmm. But I have also learned, and maybe it's got slightly easier as I got older, that sometimes walking isn't always the easiest to hear God, because I'm like a squirrel distracted by things going round about me. Oh, look, a car. Oh, look this. Oh, look that. So actually hearing, it's good for me talking to God, but hearing from God. So I've been trying to kind of like spend and build it up, just like you would if you were doing exercise, a short time. Just all I'm doing just now is sitting in God's presence, listening to him. And sometimes he says nothing, and that's okay.
A friend of mine helpfully talked about it a bit like if you had been fasting, like imagine you had decided to go without food for 7 days. You don't suddenly then go to eating a 3-course meal, because it would hurt your stomach and you're not used to eating. So you need to start gradually. And there's a thing of, if you've been a period of not spending time with God like that, you don't want to guilt yourself into thinking that you need to sit down for an hour and turn it into a big thing, because actually that's much harder for you to digest.
Yeah, or it'd be completely foolish and unachievable if I was to go out and try and run a marathon tomorrow. Yeah. And I think the athletic analogy can be quite helpful, because just the same as, do you know what, I might need to alter my exercise regime if I'm carrying an injury. And so there can be things that have happened to us, or circumstances that actually mean that, well, my time with God is going to look different to yours because I'm carrying an injury. I'm perhaps struggling with this. And that's why, do you know what, all of this leads to actually us being together in worship, in prayer. And that's why kind of like buddying up with people, going to the prayer corner at church, praying with people who are in your service team, your ministry group, your life group, your friendship circle, in QP or without QP, is all really important in helping sustain us and keep each other's going. Yeah.
I mean, to extend it a little bit further, you talked about the church in Laodicea, verse 17, you say I am rich, I have everything. You say I am rich and I have everything I want. I don't need a thing. And you don't realize that you're wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. And so if you're fasting and you forget that you're hungry, I think it's also, you can forget your need of God in the same way. If you've been removed from him for so long, then you have forgotten what it's like to be connected with him like that. And Laodicea are guilty of forgetting that they need him, and they are not dependent on him anymore. And that is so easily done.
Yeah. And I think, so again, part of the history of this area is it's an area in which earthquakes happen. So we know that in AD 17 there was an earthquake that happened that destroyed several of these cities, including Laodicea. And Laodicea, along with, I think it was Philadelphia and Pergamum, they all had to appeal back to Rome to get funds to help rebuild the cities. And then 20 or 30 years later, there's another earthquake. And by that time, Laodicea was wealthy enough that they didn't need that outside help. So I think one of the issues at work in kind of like that Laodicean culture, both within the church and out with the church, is a fierce independence and a pride of, look at what we did ourselves. And we built this place. We didn't even need help from Rome. And the challenge with all of these, or with many of these things of, do you know what? Independence isn't necessarily wrong. I mean, I always have said to my boys, one of our jobs as parents is to bring you up so that you can live independently, because otherwise you're a child all the time. So there's a right independence and there's a wrong independence. It's knowing that we're dependent upon God. And I think on one level, I think we all know that, or we all face issues in our lives where we go, I don't know how somebody gets through this without Jesus. And yet there's another level to our lives in some respects of we're able to do, most of us are able to do our jobs perfectly fine because, we've been trained in how to, rewire a house according to the Institute of Electrical Engineers' latest guide and all that sort of stuff. We are so technocratic. And the danger is when that starts to come into church, and that, not that we don't need systems and structures in place, but when it becomes all about the systems and structures, or, even all about the course. So Alpha is fantastic, but what makes Alpha fantastic is that it's an opportunity for the Spirit to work. Because if we do Alpha without the Spirit, let's just pack up and go home. It's the fact that in creating that hospitable context in which people can come with their questions, that, there's space at the table for Jesus to speak to people. And if there's not space at the table for Jesus to speak to people at Alpha, then, we become Laodicean, for want of a better thing. And that's true of church as well. I mean, I guess that's what I was trying to say. I think most of us, we could put on a church service. It could even be quite, in one sense, a good church service. But if the Spirit isn't there, then we're in deep trouble.
Well, the church at Laodicea is probably the one that, and the particular phrase, the would rather you were hot or cold rather than lukewarm, it's probably one of these phrases that has swept into popular culture. And yet when you opened it up on Sunday, you went in a direction which was new to me. I'd never thought about it that way, but I'd always wondered, because there's this bit in verse 15 where it says, I know your deeds, that you're neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. And I've always looked at that and gone, surely lukewarm is better than cold. Why is God saying, I would rather that you were cold? That just seems, I kind of get it, but it seems like, extreme language just for the sake of it. And you opened this up on Sunday in a way I hadn't heard before, which is actually, it's talking about two different things. It's not about hot water and cold water, but it's about something that heals versus something that refreshes. And actually, the bit in the middle, which neither does healing nor does refreshing, that's the lukewarm. So it is either be all in and be dealing with healing in the way that something is hot, that heals, that brings warmth, like deep heat for your body and your joints and your muscles that are sore, or here's this cold glass of, nice fresh juice, or this ice cream cone in a hot summer's day like you would experience presumably in this part of the world, which is refreshing, as opposed to the old joke about, I'll not tell it fully, but there's the old joke about the thermos flask, keeps hot things hot, keeps cold things cold. And what did the guy bring? Well, he brought soup and ice cream. which was mixed. And it's like, no, it's just the whole congealed mesh. You need to be one thing or the other, but both are actually good. And that's the first time I'd heard that before.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason is that the whole message of, particularly within the evangelical church, of being fire for God has such resonance. And of course, we want to be, we use the language of being spiritually hot, don't we? Of being on fire. And we want to be that. But again, it comes back to Jesus wasn't commenting upon their spiritual temperature, but on the effectiveness or the results of their works. So we could be really, and we all have perhaps done this ourselves or seen this done, where somebody's incredibly spiritually passionate, but actually what they do is a bit cack-handed and actually does more damage than good in their passion. Certainly I've seen that. And the challenge here is, when you're assessing what you're doing, is it healing? Is it bringing wholeness? Is it restoring? Is it repairing broken relationships? Is it part of that ministry of reconciliation that Paul tells us that the church has been given in Christ? Is it bringing wholeness? Is it refreshing? Is it calling people to life? You know, it's our mission statement is in there. You know, be refreshing, be cold. You know, not sure anybody's stood up and encouraged the church of, let's be cold, church.
I don't know if the recent explosion in popularity of cold water swimming will perhaps give more credence and understanding to this particular passage. I've certainly had more conversations about cold water swimming and the fact that cold is of benefit than I have recently had about heat being of benefit.
But I think the cold one is again a real challenge for us in our particular cultural moment. I can remember being in Lukewarm at Lukewarm Baptist Church. There was some seminars going on, and it's a while since I've spent much time in Lukewarm, but at that time in the Lukewarm and surrounding area, there was a lot of new agey kind of stuff happening, a lot of mindfulness kind of thing, and how to detox your life and de-stress. And the point that somebody made was, Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are burdened and weary." And yet if you come to church, we just make everybody busy, and we're not refreshing. So what is being a church who refreshes people, helps them feel truly alive and not burned out? What is that?
Yeah, that's good.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
That's a real challenge. I mean, it looks like us not just creating some kind of program, because that's then to slip into and we're doing this without participating in what the Spirit's doing. It starts with saying, well, Holy Spirit, in this moment, how are you wanting to refresh people? We've talked about this kind of stuff a lot, haven't we, post-COVID, because it all wearied us, or a lot of, I was at a conference last week, which a lot of it was to do with, do you know what, we're all still really weary from trying to live and trying to minister through 2 years of a pandemic. What does it mean to be a church that refreshes and there's that vibrancy? And I think that's a real challenge to us in our cultural moment. So perhaps we need to be more cold than hot just now.
So a question we can look forward to trying to answer next week, because time has more than escaped us for this week's episode. So it just shows you that when there's just the three of us, we can still fill in for four. We can still provide Iain's chat. Maybe Iain just, stay away another week's fine. Take it easy.
No, come back.
Yeah, Brodie's sitting there going, for any sake, will someone shut that pair up? maybe.
No, it's just that. It's just There's
Sharing is better.
There's
Sharing
other
is
things
caring.
there's other things that Iain does apart from the podcast. Let's just say that.
Good stuff. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. If you have got a contribution you'd like to make to the show, then do get in touch. Email office at qpbc.org. Other than that, goodbye from all of us. Cheerio.
Goodbye.
Bye.